I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Most wealthy families don't have a money problem. They have a thinking problem. And this thinking problem can be adjusted, can be addressed, it can even be corrected by structuring the legacy assets in the right way. Today, I want to talk to you about the idea of a family bank, how it's different from a family office, and what to actually do with a family bank that you put together.
I'm Rick Walker, and I've spent 25 years as a founder and chief investor at Lumacrete, scaling multiple organizations, one from 0 up to 400 employees in my 20s, another firm tripling it to over 2,000 staff across 53 countries, and another to over $200 million of AUM. And after writing the international bestseller, 9 Steps to Build a Life of Meaning, I'm sharing the anti-woke, pro-family frameworks behind scaling wealth, wisdom, and relevance.
One of the ideas that we have to get our heads around is that capital doesn't care about your intentions, it cares about math. It cares about math. What we do with our assets, whether you have $500,000 or you have $500 million, doesn't really matter if you can't get the math straight. If you can't get the math straight. And so I think a lot of people, especially people that are lower on the spectrum income wise and assets wise, they will have this trust fund mentality. What can I put aside for my kids to help my kids not have to suffer as much? That's clearly the wrong question. That's really the opposite of what you want, because you want your kids to struggle. You want your kids to figure things out. It's said that, count it all joy, my brothers, when you face trials of various kinds, for you know the testing of your faith produces perseverance. That the various types of struggles, including money struggles, lead to steadfastness. They lead to fortitude. They lead to the ability to endure. And that's one thing that you want to propagate throughout not only your kids and your grandkids, but also your great grandkids. And so you have these two options: trust fund, which sets up the idea of passive consumption. It institutionalizes passive consumption in your family. Or number two, you can set up what I'm recommending to those of you who go and talk to your attorneys. Again, I'm not an attorney. Go talk to your own attorneys and your own financial advisors. But I like the idea of a family bank. A family bank. So you have a trust fund that rewards passive consumption, or you can have a family bank that rewards active production. Active production. What if you institutionalized active production within your progeny and you penalized passive consumption? What would your family look like 10, 30, 50, 100 years from now? And how could that be something that would be revolutionary to not only to your kids and your grandkids and your great grandkids, but also the communities in which they reside? So today I want to talk about these ideas, because I know a lot of you are worried about these ideas, these random talking points that are around society. Shirt sleeves is shirt sleeves, that reportedly 70% of the second generation of wealthy individuals just basically lose it all. And I believe that. I believe that 70% is probably fairly accurate. But what can we do? If we can set up the structure right, we can maybe have hope to get the thinking right. So today I want to break down this idea between passive consumption of the trust fund mentality and active participation, active production in a family bank. So what is a family bank? First off, a family bank is different than a family office. And we'll talk about structure later on in this video. And a family office may be a great entity to serve as a GP or an advisor to a family bank. But generally, a family bank is an LLC that is focused on the lending mechanisms to the family members. And so what will happen is that we want to figure out a way that this LLC, or even a limited partnership, based off of however your financial advisor and your attorneys recommend, how this can be set up to incentivize production, one, and two, to be able to facilitate a market level return for the family at the same time. So incentivize production and facilitate a market level return, or maybe even better, for the family office. This is not an investment entity. This is a lending entity primarily. And so what we're doing is we're creating a closed loop for the capital, so the capital stays and is recycled within the family itself. And the faster a family member can return the capital, the faster it can be recycled back into the family. And we can set up some rules, some mandates to be able to do that as we go forward. And so we are basically replacing the traditional model of handouts in the trust fund model, with professional intrafamily lending, professional intrafamily lending. Um, and so this is the way that we, number one, we instill responsibility, but number two, we instill the ability to have eyes on what's happening, but also to have a little bit of distance between the family office and the family members themselves, not to get too intertwined. So the bank provides financing for productive assets. This could be anything from commercial real estate to operating businesses. But you want to stay focused on productive assets. This is not a charitable entity. This is a for-profit entity. That's just one of many of the portfolio companies, portfolio investments of the family office. And the productive assets is a very, very critical mindset to have. Again, we're not looking for something that could be lost, that could be charitably minded, could be something that's sort of a heartstring puller. We're looking for something that produces yield, because again, we're trying to build something that is long term, not something that'll be depleted over time. The trust fund is meant to be depleted as slow as possible. The family bank is meant to perpetuate and even to grow long term. So as the bank provides financing for these productive offices, the family bank also acts as a centralized pool of family liquidity. It is something where interest is paid on capital loans, and it stays within the family ecosystem. I know a lot of families will go out and invest in third-party banks, third-party lending institutions, and they'll even place capital with those lending institutions that the banks then go to redeploy. But the spread between the things, the capital placed on deposit at the lending institution and the funds that are loaned out back to the family and their affiliates, there's a spread on there. That's the inefficiency of the governance structure and the regulatory structure of the bank. And so what we do with a family bank is essentially eliminate the yield, eliminate the spread for the lending institution. Now, we don't get the multiplicative advantages that a regulatorily managed lending institution would have, but we have a little bit of a different risk profile, because we basically push the risk and absorb the risk of the invested assets of the operating businesses that family members want to launch, these real estate investments the families want to launch. We absorb that risk, and it's a trade-off for the liquidity that the multiples on the lended out money would be able to yield if it was in a traditionally invested lending institution. And so what we've done is we've created a closed loop of capital, and it stays within and constrained within the family ecosystem. But that does not mean that we do it without a structure. Okay, so the next obvious question is, how do you structure a family bank? How do we do it? Again, it's going to be formed within an LLC or a limited partnership. I think the LLC is becoming more commonly the more flexible of the options, because you can not only have a GP LP type of relationship like you can have in the partnerships, but you can also have a manager member, and you can have different classes of membership. And so if you want to have family members have access to the capital distributions from the bank, but you also want to have the ability to keep certain family members under certain ages having certain classes of voting stock, you can then do it under an LLC. Obviously, I think probably the most efficient way is to have the entirety of the membership owned by the family office, perhaps have a separate GP operating entity, just to provide a little bit of additional separation with the assets. And so the trust owns the interests in these assets in order to keep it invisible. And so the way that you would do it, if you had a bank that you want to publicize to maybe a larger family member, so assume you have 30 or more family members, you may want to formalize the bank a little bit more in a way that it can have a little bit of a public presence, but you can shield who actually owns it. And so one way that you might want to do this is, instead of having the bank membership owned by the family office, is have a separate trust that is trusteed by an outside law firm, for instance, with beneficiary to the trust, beneficiary to the family office, excuse me. And so with the family office as the beneficiary, you have the trust there. You then can get around certain public information reporting requirements in Texas so that you have a situation where the trust controls the family bank and the family offices, and none of the officers of the family office are mentioned as members, as managers, or any sort of officers or directors of the family bank. In this situation, what you would do is you would take the officers and director positions of the family bank and move them up into the trust. And so you would have a list of sub trustees or co-trustees if you wanted to within the trust. But again, I like doing a LLC as a trustee or an individual as a trustee that remains blind to the public if you're worried about asset protection there. But if you're not, if you're looking for efficiency, again, just have the family office own the family bank and just operate it like a normal LLC. One of the things you want to do as well is draft something like a family constitution for who and what and how you can use the family bank. You want to avoid any sort of accusations and acquisitions, but accusations down the line that the lending mechanism is not fair, that it's slanted toward one member. You obviously want to put constraints on the amount of liquidity that's required for every outstanding loan, a dollar loan. You also want to have an idea and constraints on the amount of debt any single family member or branch of the family tree can take on at any one time, so that there's always lending opportunity for the various different elements of the family tree. You may want to have the ability for members to work together, to partner together on certain projects, certain investments, and you may want to allow them to have a little additional lending capacity and lending constraints. You may want to put debt service coverage ratio clauses in there, even in the Constitution, to make sure that in the future these lending requirements are maintained. You want to have a certain level of professionalism with them. So a family constitution can do any of those or none of those. It's up to you on how you do it. I like the idea of actually putting the family constitution as a controlling mechanism between the formation agreement and the operating agreement, or even having it as an exhibit within the operating agreement that's unamendable. Except for maybe a supermajority of 95% of the family members or of the LLC membership. That's always a great thing to be able to do. Anything you can institutionalize within, get a formation agreement or operating agreement is great. I always like on something like this where you maybe want to have it set up to run for the next 100 or 500 years, depending on the level of your wealth. I like to have the formation agreement unalterable. You cannot replace this. You cannot amend. The formation agreement is unalterable. And then within that formation agreement, you don't fill out the standard form from the state. You write your own as a warning to the outsiders that the equity in this business can only be owned by certain individuals that meet certain family members, that any equity that's won through a lawsuit, that's won through any sort of charging order, that there are charging order protections in place that immediately convert that membership, that convert that equity stake into a subclass of membership that can never be provided distributions, can never revoke, can never inspect the books, that have all these diminishing returns. Because what you want to do is you want to put on notice to outsiders, especially to retention attorneys, that this is an asset that's not worth your time to attack. You will not get anything on there. And the idea that you put that in the formation document means that everyone knows it. Anyone that's conducting any due diligence whatsoever on your entity at the Texas Secretary of State or any other Secretary of State will see this as a huge stop sign, that if you want to hire an attorney to go attack this LLC and there's charging order protections in place, there's conversion protections in place, well, you're going to have to pay out of pocket to go attack this LLC, and many detractors are not willing to do that. And so this family constitution will cascade up to the foundation, the formation documents, down through the operating agreement, and then obviously you may have anything from a subscription agreement to loan agreements to PPMs, anything there, depending on how you want to fund your family bank. That will make it very, very clear. These are the rules to borrowing. These are the rules to participating. These are the rules for interacting with the bank. And so from there, you want to have something of a board. This may be an investment committee that also functions as a board. But you need someone that is able to review applications from the children, from the grandchildren, and give a great level of, I guess, fiduciary oversight to the family bank. Because again, we want to stay away from the trust fund model where we're just looking for passive handouts, and we want to encourage active production. That's the purpose of a family bank, is active production. And so, having a family board, depending on the size of it, anywhere between 3 and 5 individuals, I would encourage you to consider putting 2 or 3 of the seats with outside professionals. So these may be trusted attorneys, these may be estate attorneys, maybe people that have a lending background, specifically commercial real estate. Lending background is always great. People that can serve as these are either co-trustees of the trust that maybe control this family bank LLC, if you decided to go that way, or these may be a committee that's codified within the operating agreement, even within the formation agreement, that'll make all investment decisions for the family bank. And obviously, you want to have a replacement mechanism from those that's controlled by the family office itself. But it's always great to have an external board member having eyes on what's happening, and it just a great idea there. So then once you set up this committee that's going to review all the loan applications, you want to make sure that you have an idea of what market rate interest and repayment schedules would look like. You may have a situation where you want to have maybe a bifurcated type of structure. So for instance, if you're making loans to family members to purchase commercial real estate, like hard assets, you may want to provide them up to 50% of their down payment with these sorts of DSCR parameters and these sorts of payback periods. And you want to have a loan that's maybe fixed to 10-year treasuries or LIBOR or something to that effect. But generally, you're going to have something that may be formulaic in nature that sets out the interest rates that you're going to charge. So for instance, right now, as I speak in 2026, it's very common to be quoted on the highest level of investment assets. These are maybe assets that are leased by the federal government on unterminable leases. We may get a quote for 10-year treasury plus 275 bips. So if the 10-year treasury is at 4%, 275 bips is the same thing as 2.75%. You basically add the two things together and you have a functional interest rate of 6.75% that would be fixed over the duration. Again, this is for the highest level of institutional quality investment in major cities by the tier A plus 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 credit of the federal government. So you want to kind of set that as a baseline standard that you don't really want to charge anything below 2.5 to 3% above the 10-year treasury rate. So you want to allow that to float a little bit. You want to provide some fixed asset there, fixed interest rates there as possible. But you definitely want to stay away from IO, so interest-only loans from that perspective. So you don't want to fund equity out of interest-only loans on commercial real estate investments. So I mentioned bifurcation. So bifurcation, that's one, is how you would treat commercial real estate down payment loans. The other thing might be launch vehicles. So this may be a family member that maybe wants to launch an investment fund or even launch their own tech company or their own advisory business. Something like that would need to be a little bit longer in duration than what a commercial real estate down payment loan would be. This is a situation where maybe you want to try to mirror SBA requirements, or you want to provide some sort of matching loan that would allow them to only have to provide half of what an SBA loan would require to go make an acquisition or launch a business. Something like this may have a payback period of maybe a decade, and maybe even a little bit higher interest rate than the original commercial real estate loan, because this is a higher risk proposition here. You have a very, very high level of filling out a new business launch. And so you want to mitigate the risk there, right? Because we're talking about function as a fiduciary for the family bank and ultimately for the family office. We want to be able to mitigate the risk there and perhaps 10-year treasury rate that's 4%. You may want, instead of doing 275 BIP increase like you would do with commercial real estate, maybe you want to do a 375 or 475 BIP, depending on the industry there. But you can have a set of ranges, and you can have some leverage, some ability for this investment committee to offer that. But I would encourage you to look at those, look at both those options as sort of a standard default format, and you want to provide sort of baselines, bottoms for what can be charged, what sort of terms can be offered, because you definitely don't want sweetheart deals. And anytime a family member is on that investment committee and one of their children or grandchildren are coming in for a loan, obviously you want them to be able to recuse himself from that. But you want to have market rate interest for the most part, and repayment schedules. Shorter repayment schedules for co-investment, commercial real estate purchases, longer term repayment schedules for private equity investments, new business launches, and that sort of thing. You also want to put a few protections in there with marriages. Asset protection is going to be really, really critical in a situation like this, because you don't want to have a child or grandchild that you make a loan to out of the family bank lose half of the equity in the business to a spouse after a divorce. And so, and even a spousal death. I mean, that could be just tragic for the family office and for the family bank. And so, if you have a child's marriage that fails, you want the bank to be able to foreclose to keep the asset in the family, right? This is for a specific bloodline family, and you want to be able to keep this as an asset there. And so, on occasion, you're probably going to want to have the spouse sign the lending documents as well. In fact, that's probably a good rule, just to have the spouse sign those lending documents as well, and make sure, and even force the spouse to go out and hire their own attorney, who then reviews the documents before they sign it, so that there's no claims that they didn't know something. And so these are just a few of the parameters that are setting up the structure to how this works. Next, I want to get into the idea of what separates a family bank from a family office, how they look different, how they work in conjunction with one another, and how maybe you could benefit from one. So what is the difference between a family office and a family bank? Well, the family office is generally the master entity, the master LP or LLC or corporation that controls the entirety of the family investments. These may be different operating businesses. These may also be real estate assets, legacy assets in the family. These may be ranches or farms that have operating staff. But the family office LLC is generally going to be the entity that controls those things, but you obviously want to have a level of separation. So I like to have the idea of having all of the risk contained in one separate LLC, and having all the assets that are controlled by another LLC. And so the LLC that controls all the assets never signs anything that with the outside world. They never sign any loans, they never sign any contracts, they never employ any staff. They certainly never own any vehicles, they never own any real estate separately in that LLC. This is a quiet LLC. In fact, if you can make sure this LLC, like no one knows this LLC exists or this holding company exists, that's even better. Again, contact your attorney, contact your tax advisors and your other advisors about this. I'm not an attorney, this is not legal advice. I like the idea of a separate LLC that only holds assets. And then the other LLC that you're going to want to work with is an LLC that takes on all the risk. You want to have an LLC that is the object of any litigation. You want to have like the most obvious entity for litigation. This is the entity that's going to employ your staff, that's going to sign the contracts. This is the entity that's going to pay the taxes and handle the taxes. This is the entity that's going to be making the decisions, that's going to set up that investment committee. So if anyone doesn't like the terms and you want someone to sue, they can sue this entity there. And you want this to be an entity that can be shut down and replaced at any time, right? You don't want to have a lot of assets in this entity. You want it to be an asset light, litigation risk heavy LLC. You want to concentrate the entirety, if you can, of the risk and the litigatory pressure on this one LLC. This is a disposable LLC. You're going to throw it away at will. So that is your family office. So the family office from the front, from the street, the one that you have on the sign, is probably going to be a derivative of this operating entity. And this other asset that I talked about earlier that holds all your assets, this asset holding LLC, this is going to be something you never talk about. You never ever talk about. When you talk about this entity owns these businesses, has these investments, what you're going to say is, through affiliates, this entity has made these investments. You're going to change the phrasing of it, but you never want to make any claims that this operating entity that you're purposely setting up to be the public face, to be the suable face, to be the litigatory face, that this is the entity that owns anything. So that's the family office. That's the family office. And you may want to put an entity above that that maybe ties the two together and helps you consolidate tax returns a little bit easier. And that certainly may make a lot of sense. Again, consult your tax advisor on that. So now that you have the family office structure in place, you have to worry about this family bank, And I think probably a good rule of thumb is that you want about 10% of your assets, and generally no more, tied up in a family bank. You definitely don't want to put 50% of your assets that are linked out to family members. That is just asking to lose everything. Because there will be additional cash calls, there will be additional needs. Again, you do not want to create a reliance on a family bank for your family members. Remember, we're trying to get out of passive reliance and engage our children and our grandchildren with active production. So we're getting away from passivity and consumption, moving towards active production. And this is why we want to limit to really to 10%. You want to make that capital hard to get and very, very limited in nature overall. So the family bank, this is the lending engine for the family office. This is the lending engine for the family. You don't want someone coming up to the family office level, to the staff there, and asking, pitching them for equity. You want to make these guys go out of the family office to acquire the equity, and they can get the debt from the family office. They can get the leverage from the family office through the family bank, but they don't need the equity of the family office. And they certainly do not need the family office to guarantee loans. That's a huge issue with family offices, especially those that are in the farming or ranching business. So you have this family bank, who again is generally an LLC, is going to act as the lending engine. It's a specific vehicle for intra-family capital deployment, right? We're not going to the other entities to be able to borrow money, to pledge assets. We're confining all the lending capacity that we can within this. No one else pledges any other assets. That's the way that we want to structure this. So these family offices and the family banks work in conjunction. The family office will often act as a general partner or a manager of the family bank LLC. Now this is relationally, not absolutely. So you don't want this asset holding family office LLC to be the actual manager who's signing documents on behalf of your family bank. That's a huge issue. Again, we do not want the asset holding entities signing anything, especially with family members that can become disgruntled. So we want to have another entity that signs that. You could even have this operating employee owning LLC that you're using to sort of focus all the litigation pressure on. You can have that act as the manager, as long as the family office or a separate pool of people can replace the manager at will. Again, the manager is not something that is inheritable. It's not an asset. It's a position. It's not an asset. It's a position. So I don't know that you can really take away a managership from somebody. It's not really an asset to be able to take away, and so it can easily be reassigned from what I understand. So the family office is going to handle the reporting and the compliance for the bank's activities. So you want to use the family office as sort of a back office, and then you want to have a shared administrative agreement between the two entities. So you want to have that with all the other entities that this LLC, this operating LLC for the family office works with, because you never want to have any claims of violating or piercing the corporate veil of that operating business. You don't want the liability or the litigation to escape that LLC. So you want to have administrative sharing agreements in place. You want to make sure that those are properly funded every month. There's an invoice sent and there's a reimbursement for those services, plus a little bit of profit between the companies that it does work with. And you also want to make sure that you've got a firewall with credit cards. You don't want anyone having ability to be able to spend any money through a credit card on personal expenses through that operating LLC. That's a big issue where litigators can go through and attack through the back wall And so it creates what they call an alter ego of the person. So imagine this person that's out there putting personal things on their corporate credit card for this family office LLC, or God forbid, one of the asset holding LLCs. Maybe this person gets into a car accident, and basically they go through the back way to show that this person is really an alter ego, or this entity is really an alter ego of this person that had the car accident, and they're able to go and attack those assets. That's a very dangerous place to be. And so this is why also, managers and leaders, we got to make sure people are not misusing their corporate credit cards, right? There's a lot of backdoor litigation, backdoor risks there that we've got to stay away from. And so you've got the family office, the family bank that work in conjunction to move the family from founders to governors. So the purpose of the conjunction of the family office and the family bank are to move the mindsets, to change the mindsets from founders to governors of wealth, from founders to stewards of wealth, from passive consumers to active contributors. And this is really where we need to get the families to go, second and third generation. So this also gives you a training vehicle, a training ground for the future generations on how to do this. We also want to make sure that the entitlements that those begin to get addressed very, very early on within the children. That there are chores that are required in the homes. That there's always an allowance that's earned, not an allowance that's given. You want to make sure that effort is always connected with money. That there's never a disconnection between money and effort, right? Because again, we're trying to build the capacity multi-generationally that effort and work and diligence and responsibility and pain are the precursors to reward. And so we've got to instill that within the kids. And then that stays true as they grow up. You don't want a child that's raised properly to be able to be in a position where they can squander what they were given because their mindset is wrong. And so we want to create a mindset that's appreciative, that there's opportunity there, but make sure that the opportunity is earned, not just given. We want children to be able to see that wealth is a tool that can be earned, not a asset to be received, not a gift, not a trinket, not a tool to self-aggrandizement or pride or buying stuff for ourselves, or certainly not a tool to power. And so you want to be able to still appreciation in there, but the appreciation has to be connected with a blessing that's connected with work, not comfort. And so you may want to consider moving to a format like this as a trial, where you involve the next generation small decision-making activities early on. I like the idea of using a DAF, a donor advised fund, for this as they're young. And maybe if you've got 10 grandchildren, put $1,000 a year into their donor advised fund that they can then grant out to charities. And every year you would bring them back for an annual family member meeting. They would present how they granted out to these charities, why they picked those charities, and what the return they would expect from the charities would be. Again, this doesn't have to be anything significant, but it just has to be something where they've documented what they did with the money, why they did it, and what their expectations of what the nonprofits were going to do with the money were. There's also probably a pretty big need for a mentorship program to be in place where family members, again, most of these are going to have very, very good education depending on the level of wealth of the family, where family members go through a business plan development process before or in conjunction with the lending process. So you want to have the ability to be able to have an outside advisor or two help them develop their business plan, help them put together a board of advisors for their new investment, and also have them stress tests, whether through a Monte Carlo simulation or something to that effect, what would happen under a range of various scenarios with the investment. And you want the business plan to be hardened. And so that is what I would consider to be one of the mandatory precursors to applying for a loan, is have a hardened, reinforced business plan that is presented with the loan application. And finally, I think we want to make sure that the people that are taking loans, that are going and addressing loans, are seeing that they are not owners, but they're stewards for the next 100 years. And this is why having a closed cycle ecosystem for the family's capital is really, really important, because the decisions that they're making about the risk that they're assuming through the business ventures is one that is going to be impactful only for their children and their grandchildren and their great grandchildren. So if they know that their great grandfather was the one that lost all the wealth for the family, there's a lot of risk on there. There's a lot of expectation. There's a lot of um, stewardship requirements that is on that family member, that are on that family member, and that's something that I think that works well in a place where you have a closed ecosystem of the capital. And so, understanding that the people that you're most charged to take care of, your kids and your grandkids and your great grandkids, are also the ones that will suffer or benefit under your hard-earned work. That's something to definitely keep in mind. That's something to definitely keep in mind. And it prevents walkaways from loans. It prevents a lot of the other issues that you would typically have with a traditional lending organization. I want to give you 3 tips that are actionable, and they function as a blueprint to effectuate this idea of a family bank that is working alongside a family office to instill not only legacy, but protect capital, and also to really infuse wisdom into the following generations. Tip number 1 is you don't want to give your kids a down payment. You want to give them a loan from the family bank. Give them a loan from the family bank, because we're going to tie capital together with responsibility. They always are coterminous. You never get capital without responsibility for that. And the responsibility is this: not only that you don't lose it, but that you return it better than you found it. You return every dollar better than you found it. It means you're paying interest on it. Um, and so that is one way that we do that. We want to make sure that we stay away from down payments, giftings, and we want to move towards a lending capacity, and a family bank is a great way to do that. Number 2, depending on how your advisors advise you and your tax advisors and what the particular tax code may be at the time, a dynasty trust may be an option to bypass probate and minimize estate taxes across multiple generations. This may be used in conjunction with the family office as well as a family bank. And certainly ask your attorneys, ask your tax counsel about how that might work. And tip number 3, I alluded to earlier, is consider holding a one-day family assembly every year. This family assembly that's annually held may be held, at the family office around a board table, maybe even held on a family vacation or retreat, maybe the day after Christmas or the day after Thanksgiving every year. But we want to make sure that they understand the bank's performance, each individual loan's performance, and you reinstill the mission of the bank. The mission of the bank, again, is to move away from a trust fund mentality that rewards passive consumption and move towards a family bank mentality that rewards active participation, active commitment, and active production. Active production. And so if we can instill this active production within the various generations and propagate it through to the next 50, 100 years of family members, we can realize that it's not the cycle of money that counts. The money is merely a tool that allows you to form a responsibility. And it's the responsibility that you instill in the people who manage it that makes sure that the capital is back. It is a closed ecosystem, responsibility and capital. But you need the wisdom to be able to form it. The structure is found in the wisdom to encourage active participation, active construction, and active contributions, not only to society, but also to your families. And a family bank is definitely one option that allows this. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, invest@lumacree.com. I'd be happy to answer anything that you have there. We also have some asset protection strategies that we had an attorney put together. Again, consult your own attorneys, consult your own tax advisors, your own real estate advisors for this, but feel free to reach out if we can be of service to you. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe below, comment, let me know your questions, and I will see you next time.